Thank you so much, Mahima, and thanks to the observatory here for inviting me. It's a great pleasure after the sessions we had in May this year, when you were in full swing with your election process, and it showed then and still now how democracy here in India is kicking and alive. Let me say that I'm very pleased and honored to support the Observer Research Foundation in organizing the Cyfy conference. And it is clear, you know, that we are here on solid ground. When we talk about cyberspace, cybersecurity, we should grasp the fact that an incredible number of internet users in India are there to be, and India, for that matter, is a really key player in the global debates on the future of cyberspace. And no wonder that Cyfy has drawn such a large audience this year. I heard that the audience was a little bit bigger yesterday, throughout the day, and who knows how things will look in the late afternoon today. Now, let me say that it's also good to see that the conference is actually involving all stakeholders. And it is, in that sense, a perfect avenue to engage on the matters of cyberspace. And the key points to be addressed are actually the shared interests for democratic market-based countries in the cyberspace. It is about implementing state sovereignty in the cyberspace, and it is about the fact, and here I'm talking for our own cause, that the Netherlands is hosting this global cyberspace conference in April 2015 in The Hague. And we would like, of course, here with our Dutch delegation to address the opportunities that this conference will offer to promote a free, open and secure internet. Now, talking about shared interests for our countries in the cyberspace, for both Netherlands and India, cyberspace creates grand opportunities, but also it presents new threats. And the challenge is to continue benefiting socially and economically from the cyberspace as a global public good, while at the same time finding ways to protect national interests, guarantee the rights of citizens, and find responsible ways to exercise sovereignty in cyberspace. Being here in India, I take particularly note that internet has become a vital factor in exercising democracy and indeed free speech, and that is so important, as we all know. And given that throughout the world, we should face it, censorship and surveillance are on the rise, it's good to remind ourselves that the political and civil rights that are protected offline must also be protected online. Seeing how important cyberspace has become to our societies, it's no surprise that the way the internet is governed has become an increasingly contentious, if not controversial topic. The Netherlands and India, I'm happy to say so, share many of the same concerns here. And for our part, the Netherlands support, for instance, the Net Mundial principles and the roadmap for internet governance reform based on a multi-stakeholder approach, and I do see some sort of common ground growing on both ends. Within these parameters, I would say, and when we talk about a multi-stakeholder thing, it is about an approach. We should not be dogmatic. We must involve all stakeholders in their respective role, but we should be very clear that effective decision-making is also part of the story. And we must for that matter, strengthen the role of governments in the system in those areas in which governments have a legitimate public policy concern. Here, taking a sort of other point, but on a similar track, for the transition of the IANA contract, that means that the way it is exercised should be made more accountable to the global community in which the global south plays an increasingly important role. However, ICANN functions must remain with independent private organizations as part of a distributed, polycentric ecosystem of internet governance. A full mouth of words, but you know what I'm talking about. And while states must be able to influence the overall direction and parameters for internet governance, they should not be involved in the running of the day-to-day operations, for that should be kept to the experts from the technical community. When strengthening the role of governments in the governance of cyberspace, we must ensure that this does not lead to the sort of multilateral paralysis that we have seen in so many other areas thus far. The topic is simply, ladies and gentlemen, too important. Too important for that. Obstacles in reaching agreement on solutions should not prevent solutions being developed in the first place. And the global community should find middle ground to develop a workable and responsible proposal for globalizing the IANA function before the deadline in late 2015. Such proposals are necessary to guarantee the vitality and the permissionless innovation that are fundamental source of socio-economic benefits of cyberspace. And we cannot allow a lack of compromise to be used as a reason for maintaining the status quo here, because involvement of a truly global community is I say it as it is, a moral imperative. It is clear, ladies and gentlemen, that cyberspace, of course, presents challenges to the national security of societies and states. Citizens expect their governments to take responsibility for their security in cyberspace, as long as they do so to protect privacy. It's logical, therefore, that state sovereignty also plays its part in the cyberspace. The Netherlands has just as much interest in this as every other country. Our vital infrastructures are targeted on a really daily basis, and we have suffered serious and severe attacks aiming at undermining the basic functions of society and the state. However, if sovereignty plays its part in the cyberspace, it also means the existing system for regulating international relations between sovereign states is applicable in cyberspace. And that system, what I'm talking about, is international law. And it offers far more opportunities than it is sometimes assumed. The Netherlands believe that it already offers useful instruments that can contribute to greater security and stability among states, even though its application must be clarified. It is applicable, but the question is, of course, how. Important work is being done by the UN Group of Government Experts, the GGE, on clarifying how international law, including international humanitarian law, governs behavior of states in situations of armed conflict in the cyberspace. However, equally important, of course, it is to look at situations below that threshold. Fields of law like the laws of state responsibility, trade law, international human rights law, and parallels, I would like to emphasize that, parallels from the laws of the sea and not the least outer space could offer guidelines for responsible state behavior. It would be more effective to see how these already agreed upon instruments work in the cyberspace than entering into contentious negotiations on new ones. We should be positive and we should be constructive. Work is being done already in academia, and discussions as here in the conference Cyfy can indeed contribute to generating ideas and develop consensus. By supporting a series of regional meetings and seminars on these topics, the Netherlands is actively contributing to this process, and the results of these meetings will serve as an input for our discussions in the global conference in April 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, increasing confidence and trust is a key to increase stability and predictability in the cyberspace. Norms of responsible state behavior and also very important confidence-building measures can pave the way for the wider clarification and application of international law. Some norms could even go beyond the protection arrangements included in the international law. For example, when we talk about the identification and protection of certain neutral objects, the neutral zone, and cyberspace enabling ICTs. They could be declared off limits, these zones could be declared off limits to any action that undermines their stable and secure operation in both war and peacetime. Our global conference on cyberspace will offer a platform to clarify and also specify what this would look like in practice, putting these principles into practice, in order to facilitate consensus and agreement in other processes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what we should not be up to is to get into what is sometimes called a sort of cyber Westphalia agreement. International political agreements are important in working out how state sovereignty can be responsibly implemented in cyberspace. This should be done very carefully, because a full Westphalian interstate system for cyberspace is simply untenable. States will never be able to fully regulate against the inherent risks of cyberspace, because in many cases these are also its great strengths, greatest strengths. State sovereignty in the cyberspace should and inevitably will focus on the state's specific responsibilities, not the least because the states are, well, they are not simply the only stakeholders controlling the domain. And I even would like to say that state authorities must learn to accept this reality. No less than that. Ladies and gentlemen, the Netherlands is hosting, as I already said before, the Global Conference on Cyberspace in April next year. And it will discuss and deal with similar issues discussed here at the Cyfy conference. The Global Conference in The Hague is not the determinative process that delivers an international agreement. It is rather a platform for high-level international discussions that can generate ideas and bring ideas a step further on how to move the international debate forward. It will take place, let me say that, at a very interesting moment. I should warn you that the tulips will not flourish anymore at that moment. Nevertheless, it will be exactly 1 year after Net Mundial, and it is, for that matter, a right time for midterm review of their findings, of the roadmap of the Net Mundial. It will be right in the middle of the discussions of the Bild Commission on Internet Governance. It will be halfway into the mandate of the current UN group of government experts. And it will be a few months before the current IANA contract will expire. A continuing Dutch innovative approach to this type of high-level conference will be an interactive session which will be held based on several cyberspace dilemmas in a sort of fictitious scenario. All participants will be asked to discuss and contribute to possible solutions. This innovative approach has been, I would nearly say, tried out in the Nuclear Security Summit with the government leaders from all over the world in the beginning of this year. The desired end of the conference in The Hague will be a negotiated chair statement that would include 3 outcomes. First, support for practical implementation and international cooperation, where we would jointly develop practical worldwide responses to urgent challenges. For example, cooperating in investigation and prosecution of cyber crime, improving, for example, CERT cooperation. Second, support the emerging consensus on norms and also on international stability. As already discussed, we should focus on clarifying the role of international law as a real and sincere source of stability in relations among states. And we should support the emergence of consensus on certain norms of responsible state behavior. Third, and by far most importantly, we would like to go for capacity building and the exchange of knowledge. Here, we are in a good location, here in New Delhi, in India, for what you call the Digital India program is a truly fantastic example of the kind of capacity building that will lead to economic growth and not the least social development. By exchanging expertise on capacity building, more countries will be able to harness those benefits. Increasing capacity building in a structural and significant way is not only crucial for bridging the global digital divide, it is also crucial as a confidence-building measure in itself for international relations. And at the conference, the Netherlands will launch a global forum on cyber expertise where all parties can share their cyber expertise. Partners from both sides of the digital divide will work together to launch joint initiatives on capacity building, and within those capacity building efforts, best practices in the fields of cybersecurity, tackling cybercrime, and not to forget data protection. We should increase the political dialogue on capacity building and build solid support and also solid funding for those activities. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, and turning back to Cyfy, it is important to have these sort of conferences where different perspectives are exchanged among a global audience from all parts of the world. They are valuable for finding and supporting emerging consensus on international agreements. Of course, we must keep in mind that only by working together we can unlock the huge potential gains in wealth and welfare that cyberspace holds. We hope, on our part, from the Netherlands, to greet our Indian friends and also the friends from other parts of the world in The Hague. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rosenthal, for your remarks, and we're really looking forward to the global conference on cyberspace. And as you mentioned, Digital India is a very big project, and Indian stakeholders are certainly looking forward to capacity development. We are opening this up to the audience, but before we do, I'll sort of shoot the first question. Since you've been building up to this global conference next year in August, in April, and I know that you've been traveling and you've been meeting all kinds of stakeholders across the world, I would be interested in knowing what is the kind of outreach and what is the kind of participation that you are expecting from the so-called swing states or the global south, because those are the actors that you really need to get into the conversation for it to be truly global.
Well, thank you for this question. It's really, you're really shooting the question to me. Well, let me say that we want to get as many countries on board as possible. Because, Internet is a global affair. I can't imagine other domains of policy and social and societal activities where we have this truly global dimension. By the way, the Internet and telecom are as strong as the weakest link. So we need to get all countries, as many countries as possible on board. And there, of course, there are those swing states. And we put much effort in getting them on board. And let me say that the signs thus far have been really encouraging. And I would say that here the by far most important point at hand is, I said it in just a small interjection in my speech, is not to be dogmatic.
Yes.
And to open up to the sphere in which Internet is developing throughout the world. And let me just give you one example of how surprising the cyberspace arena may sometimes be when you are talking to authorities and the corporate world in another country. For instance, take a country like the Philippines, not that far from here. It was striking to me, at least, that when we were talking there with the authorities and also with people from the NGOs, one of the most serious concerns they have are exactly on this another sort of divide, namely between the pros and cons of the developments in the Internet. The cons, to take the bad news first, are in the Philippines with the abuse of the Internet for online child abuse practices. But the pros are with their huge expectation, and rightly so, in getting a true development on e-health and e-education throughout these 1,000 populated islands in the Philippine realm. So we should be willing to accept the different priorities of several countries. We should not be dogmatic about questions about multi-stakeholders approach, etc. We should get as many countries on board, and overall, as I said, the prospects are truly encouraging.
Let me follow that up with another question. We recently had a very high-level visit from Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. Yes. And he was talking about the fact that we have 4 billion people yet to be connected to the internet.
Yes.
And they are putting together a great project to try and connect them. So my question really is, and I'm new to the policy world, I've been an ICT practitioner before this. We are moving towards building some kind of international agreements today. But what happens when those 4 billion stakeholders come into this world? Are we ready to relook at these agreements? Where are we in that?
Well, this is, your question is, this second question is also hitting the mark, I would say. Let me say that when we talk about the stakeholders, something funny is going on, I would say. Usually we talk about 3 partners to the game. The private sector, corporate world. We talk about, and in the private sector, corporate world, not only the big ones, but also mid-sized and small-sized businesses. Yes. We talk about governments and we talk about the NGOs. That having been said, we are also talking about billions of end users of the internet, the consumers. And they should also be part of it. Now, in democratic countries, we may say that governments link up with these end users of the internet. But at the same time, sometimes we forget about these huge developments, and we should take them really into serious notice. You're talking about billions of people. We were, last week, we were in China, and when you look there to the numbers, they are only comparable to yours, you know, and they are huge on both ends. And it's remarkable how quick the developments have gone. I will not bore you with statistics, but the curve, you know, in the use of the internet, and also, by the way, telecom, mobile phone communication, it is huge. And a wonderful part to that story is that the use of the internet and also mobile phone communication and what have you is often of such a kind that some countries are able to jump in mega jumps to totally new levels of development. Yes. Sometimes, indeed, jumping over the situation which we see in some of the so-called advanced countries. Yes.
As tempted as I am to hog the mic, I'd like to open this up to the audience. Can you pass the mic, please? Can you identify yourself and then ask the question? And also to Mr. Dugal.
Yes, good morning. I'm Gudmundur Eriksson. I'm a professor of international law at Jindal, and as such, my heart was warmed once again, as it was at the inaugural session, by your reference to the tools of international law. And specifically, like I did on the previous occasion, referred to the law of the sea as the model, as you suggest also. And just to elaborate 4 points why I think that's relevant, and particularly following the debate in the past, in yesterday. First, it was a response, law of the sea would respond to real economic realities. Secondly, it had major macro-political consequences. Thirdly, it works even in the absence of what a very significant player, somebody should be playing in the law of the sea field. And fourthly, it was successful because the fringe people, much like you mentioned, countries like you mentioned, were brought on board through capacity building, which you've also mentioned. Now, you also mentioned, alas, the multilateral paralysis in many fields of international law. One of my great disappointments is with respect to the international environmental field. But I'm hoping we're not back to Westphalia. Maybe it's a Westphalia 2, where states are prepared to surrender some of their sovereignty in the common good. Thank you.
Well, sir, thank you for this, for these remarks. Your message on possible application of certain components of international sea law are taken very, very positively here. How could it be different from a country, the Netherlands, where the origins of international sea law stem from, isn't it? Let me add to that. You mention a sort of negative example. You consider it negative, namely international environmental law. Let me draw your attention once more to a suggestion which we got to also indeed look in the same manner as with international sea law to outer space law, where the situation was actually totally unregulated, and then the stakeholders involved, not only the states, but also the big interests behind outer space, were actually coming to very good agreements over time. And it does work. So let's try to be positive on these developments, look for the positive examples, and draw upon them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pavan Dugal, Advocate Supreme Court of India, working in cyber law. London, Budapest, talked about rules of the road. Then Snowden happened. Somewhere in between, the Seoul conference happened. And now, from Seoul conference till such time the Hague conference takes place, some new developments have come up. Internet of Things is now center stage. Similarly, social fabrication or 3D printing is now increasingly a bigger challenge. So when, sir, you talk about the application of international humanitarian law to cyberspace, practitioners feel that there are a large number of legal policy challenges when you apply, because you did not really create that law for this new paradigm. So my question to you, do you really see some practical challenges? And more significantly, are there some institutional talking points or platforms available for stakeholders, including state actors, to talk in this entire environment of distrust and mistrust that's been created?
Well, sir, let me keep myself on safe ground on my part. I'm not not an expert in international law as you are. When we talked a little bit before the session, I couldn't match your wisdom and expertise on this. So I take your message very seriously. And but let me say that talking about the application of international law up till now, I would say that it was already a truly remarkable achievement in the context of, for instance, the UN-CTED, the group of government experts, to come to the heart of the matter, namely the applicability of international law to the cyberspace domain. And then the next question will be how to apply it, and how to, let me say, grasp the best practices involved in international law to use them for a further step with regard to international cyberspace law. That would be the process to go. And I happen to feel with you some hesitations because of the setbacks, the obstacles, the impediments, which we definitely will face on the road to specification and clarification in this field. But it's a matter of, let me say, trial and error. At the same time, everybody, I would say, both in the private and in the public sector world, and also with an increasing number of end users, they feel the urgency which is here. We can't leave it as it is. We are behind. We have left behind by now the first initial phases of the coming of the internet. Then it was a matter for those who were ingenious, you know, in going for a wonderful adventure. By now we are far beyond that, and we have to get to some sort of common understanding among the stakeholders involved about the need for instance, for a appropriate application of the standards of international law. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? So, yeah, something.
There too.
Okay, so Dr. Bajaj, and then we'll close the session. Just 2 questions.
My name is Aleid Wagenmaker. Besides being a soldier, I'm also an academic, a scholar in international relations and interventionism. Thank you for your stimulating and interesting thoughts and sharing that with us. You pointed towards the responsibility of states and also about the need for security. In the, maybe a decade ago, there was a very huge debate, especially in interventionism, about the responsibility to protect. And it's maybe a bit idealistic, but we can talk a lot about ungovernmental spaces, about multi-stakeholders, etc., etc. But is there a need for a debate and moreover activism in cyberspace about a responsibility to protect, especially by states? And if so, how do you envision this? Thank you.
Maybe we can take the second question.
Maybe I should answer right away. Thank you for this incisive question. I have been, in a former capacity, I was heavily involved in discussions, also on the UN level, on responsibility to protect, sir. And let me say that your message is, or your suggestion is really worth picking up, for sure. But I would rather say first comes first. Let's first identify the specific responsibilities of state authorities, and before entering into the frame, into actually the frame setting of responsibility to protect, there is so much already to sort out. I would be very no, I will not go beyond that. Not going into a comparison between the examples where we really should go for responsibility to address authorities on their responsibility to protect their civic population, you know, against misbehaviors and the most terrible things you can imagine. That is one that I'm not up to that for this moment. I should be frank. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a last question. Dr.
I'm Kamlesh Bajaj from Data Security Council of India. My question relates to Cyber Westphalia agreements, which you mentioned, and partly the gentleman over there has talked about it also.
Yeah.
That many of the other laws can be taken as the guiding spirit, as you mentioned, law of the seas and so on. But if you look at the history of the law of the seas, we still do not have many of the states which have signed to that. And we have this problem of the South China Sea. So I think we shouldn't be surprised that even after 100 years, when the original pioneers and states were fighting, there were pirates in the seas.
Absolutely.
And all of that was happening and still continues to happen. And the cyberspace, which is relatively much newer, then to look at the Westphalian type of agreements, whether they are there or they will not be there, is probably too premature to make a statement. And we have the same kind of cybersecurity and piracy problem in the cyberspace, and all kinds of crimes are taking place. At the same time, the unique nature in terms of unifying all the world into a social community and the societal impact which it is having. So I think the agreements which will have to be, the governments will have to play a stronger and a bigger role in whether the multi-stakeholders are there, they will be there. But the role of the governments is something which will have to enable these kind of agreements being created. They may be diluted type of Westphalian agreements, nevertheless agreements will have to be there. And the seas can guide, but then we should be prepared for a prolonged battle, several years to go by before some kind of emergence or convergence emerges.
Thank you, sir, for your observations and your question. With regard to your observation, let me say that I can be happy, quote unquote, to say that the Dutch government is not only keen on the developments in the cyberspace, but also tries its utmost to share responsibilities in anti-piracy missions in several parts of the world up to now. Secondly, your observations and also your question actually invite us to explore in a little bit more in depth the several domains of international law which could be of use to the cyberspace issues at hand. And when I would look at maritime law on the one hand and outer space law on the other, I could imagine, but maybe I'm totally on the wrong track, I should admit, that with regard to outer space law, there is of course this similarity to the cyberspace issues as far as the application of high tech is concerned. And there, you know, I would say, I would like to reiterate that not only international sea law, but also international developments in the legal sphere where totally new challenges have to be tackled, you know, that would be of the utmost interest to consider. With regard to, and there I hope I give an answer to your last question. I would like to repeat that the road to international legal frameworks in this sphere, this road is full of difficulties, etc. It's not an easy road to go, but because the urgency is there, I would say that we should appeal also to the political leadership throughout the world to get their act together. And perhaps interestingly enough, this brings us all the way back, because there was an observation that all the way back to the beginnings of what we then call sometimes this London process. Starting in London, going to Budapest, afterwards Seoul, South Korea, and now The Hague. The beginnings of all that were a true concern among some political authorities, including ministers of foreign affairs at that time, and they were then actually especially working through London, through the former UK Foreign Secretary William Hague, who at a certain moment said that cyberspace is so important that it should be lifted up to the strategic and political level. And here, I'm going off my line, so my delegation will be not that happy perhaps about it, but I would say that also with regard to this discussion about international law, ladies and gentlemen, this is also, it's not only important to have it in the hands of the international lawyers and legal experts, but it should be also part of a enlightened dialogue and discussion among the strategic political leaders in the world. We should have, and here we should have indeed this linkage between the experts and those in political responsibility positions.
Well, thank you for your remarks, Dr. Rosenthal. And I think that we take that quite dearly in India, linking experts with our political leaders as India takes a more central role in internet governance debates. For those of you who came late, Dr. Rosenthal will actually be joining us again in the session on the future of internet governance, which will start at around 4 o'clock. So you will have the opportunity to ask him more questions, I'm sure. But for the moment, thank you so much, sir. I know it was a long flight, and you've only come to India for 1 day for us. So I thank you for coming and joining us. OK, we break now, and we are going to come back for our next session very soon. So thank you for joining us this morning.